Time now, though, as we do at this hour every week, to turn things over to Howard Kurtz and his reliable sources. And Howie, as I do so, both Time and Newsweek cover stories on, of course, the major drama that played out for middle week and continues through the weekend, the death of Michael Jackson at age 50.
And John, that Time is a special issue. And look, this is a huge story. This was one of the most famous people on the planet. His music touched so many people, and his appalling behavior at times also shocked a lot of people. But I think we're on the fourth day now. Everyone still seems to be churning out stories about Michael Jackson, trying to keep the story alive, I think, for ratings and circulation. We'll talk about that. From the moment I heard that Michael Jackson had suffered cardiac arrest, I knew the media world would explode, and particularly after the gossip site TMZ reported late Thursday that Jackson had died, followed by the LA Times an hour later. That's exactly what happened.
Legacy, decades of hits.
It wasn't just the wall-to-wall cable coverage. NBC Nightly News devoted more than half its broadcast to the pop star's death, and that of Farrah Fawcett. And look, Jackson was one of the most famous and controversial people in the world. And public interest in his unexpected passing was nothing short of huge.
Michael Jackson had an extraordinary career and a troubled life marked by incredible highs and terrible lows.
The child prodigy who lived through illness, a sex scandal, and massive money trouble.
He's enormously talented, Brett, but there's also such a freak show associated with him.
His life was so fascinating, so controversial, and frankly bizarre that we often forget how amazing a performer he was and how incredible the music is.
His monster music career gave way to years of personal problems, plastic surgery, child abuse allegations, and just plain weirdness. The question for me was which Michael Jackson news organizations would choose to remember in their coverage. Joining us now in Los Angeles, Carlos Diaz, correspondent for the entertainment news show Extra. In Tampa, Eric Deggans, television and media critic for the St. Petersburg Times. And in New York, Diane Dimond, investigative journalist and author of the book Be Careful Who You Love, Inside the Michael Jackson Case. Carlos Diaz, you did relatively little on Extra about what I would call the dark side of Michael Jackson. Is there a tendency in the media to airbrush the unpleasant parts of the picture when someone dies?
I think that, you know, we try to cover everything we can on Extra, but I mean, we looked at in Hollywood what people in Hollywood were saying about Michael Jackson, and that was the story. People in Hollywood, we were interviewing Jamie Foxx the second the news came down that Michael Jackson had passed away. The first thing that the Oscar award winner said to us was, let's not remember Michael Jackson, the circus sideshow. Let's remember him for his talent. And that's been echoed throughout Hollywood.
And Eric Deggans, I know some people are saying let's focus on the musical legacy and not on his well-documented history of weirdness, but we're journalists, and it seems to me that we should not minimize or even whitewash some of the strange and disturbing stuff that went on in Jackson's life.
Yeah, without a doubt, because that's the story. He was our generation's Elvis, and part of Elvis's legacy as well was sort of a tortured personal story that went along with great creative achievement. And if you don't tell the part of the story that's a little tough to talk about, you don't tell the whole story.
And Diane Dimond, it was the Martin Bashir documentary some years back that led to the trial on child molestation allegations that you covered in 2005. You wrote a book about it. In that documentary, Jackson was seen holding hands with the boy who later became his accuser and defended sleeping with the young boys in bed, saying nothing sexual had gone on. Let's take a look at what Michael Jackson told Diane Sawyer after that acquittal.
Did you ever, as this young boy said you did you ever sexually engage, fondle, have sexual contact with this child or any other child?
Never, ever. I could never harm a child or anyone. It's not in my heart. It's not who I am. And it's not what I'm not even interested in that.
Diane, did the coverage of that trial change Jackson's image forever?
Yes, I think it did, but I think your timing might be off on that interview with Diane Sawyer. I think that was after the 1993 case.
I see.
And I think that is what started to change the perception of Michael Jackson a bit. I remember when I first got the assignment to cover him, I'm a crime reporter. I don't cover celebrities. And when crime and Michael Jackson and child abuse were all put in one sentence for me, it was like, what? Didn't even scan until 1993. 2003, I think, changed it irreparably.
And you were right on the timing. That interview we just showed was from 1995. It was when he was after he was first accused, and I guess that led to a civil settlement with the family.
And Lisa Marie was sitting by his side. He just married Lisa Marie, I remember.
Right, and then the issue came back at the 2005 trial. Carlos Diaz, this was a guy who had it all, who grew up before our eyes, who was immensely talented, and then came the plastic surgery, the skin lightening, that scene that I've seen so many times where he was dangling the baby over the balcony, and the media, of course, were drawn to these stories.
Well, and it's ironic because the stories now are that at first Michael Jackson himself put out these weird stories of sleeping in hyperbolic chambers, owning the bones of the Elephant Man. Michael puts these things out because he wants to be seen as unusual, but then he kind of becomes a victim of his own circumstance because he becomes unusual. And with the lightening of the skin, he has, he says he has vitiligo. He says that he only had 2 plastic surgery procedures when it looks like he had 20. So it's unusual that at first he would put things out like this, but then spend the rest of his life defending rumors from the tabloids and from other media.
So why
reports.
would he do that? Was some kind of PR strategy on his part?
That was the way it was.
Yeah,
that was the way it was. Remember in the 80s when we had Prince and Madonna and Michael all trying to kind of combat their weirdness at the same time. That was really the way it was early in the 80s and late 80s, where stars were not just known for the music they put out. It was that because we didn't have TMZ and we didn't have 24-hour coverage of entertainment news, so they could kind of like shape their own image and give questions that that only they could answer.
And how Michael Jackson had the master at that, the late Bob Jones. He said to me one time after he was out of the employ of Michael Jackson, he said, the theory was, why stick with just one day of coverage? Because you media people, you'll lap it up. So we put out the hyperbaric chamber picture and let it sit there for a few days and fester and everybody picks it up. Then we issue a denial. Bingo, I've got 5 days worth of coverage because you guys will do that.
It's interesting that it was so calculated. Eric Deggans, television, of course, showing clips of him as a boy in the Jackson 5 days, and in talking to just ordinary people, it's striking to me how many folks of a certain generation were touched by Michael Jackson's music. Have the media in this all of the excess of coverage that's coming out now, have they underestimated his importance in part as a racial trailblazer who was making music videos just when this was becoming popular in the 80s and a lot of the stars were white?
Oh, yeah. One of the interesting things about Michael Jackson is, that's why we're talking about him. There's so many branches to this story. This is a man who had a hit in literally every decade that he was a performer. The 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, even to the turn of the new century. And the interesting thing about his emergence in the 80s, for example, was that he was one of the biggest artists after the disco boom to reunite white and black audiences, because the backlash against disco kind of, separated white and black audiences into punk and disco. And all of a sudden he comes along and he forces MTV to start featuring black artists, and also brings these disparate audiences together. I was a pop music artist myself in the late 80s, and I can tell you, I was playing clubs in Kentucky and Tennessee and places that normally no black person could go without a bodyguard. but they loved us because they had been conditioned by Michael and later Janet to accept black artists.
If we have a couple extra minutes, we'll ask you to sing, Eric.
No, you don't want that. I'm a drummer.
Let me turn to Diane Dimond. Oh, you're a drummer. Okay. Is this now going to be the new Anna Nicole Smith case, where the media are going to spend days and weeks and months, who knows, reporting on the cause of death, the drugs, who gets custody of the 3 kids, what happens to the money? Is this just not going to go away?
Yes, and yes. You know what? Look, let's talk about the media. What part of the media? Newspapers, cable. That's their bread and butter. What's happening right now? So that's
let me just jump in. Let's put up some of those headlines. Okay, as you're talking, we're putting up some of the front pages to show this has been a big print story as well.
Exactly. I got a call from Maclean's magazine, the Canadian magazine, that said, help, quick, can we excerpt parts of your book, because we're going to do our whole issue. We've thrown it out. We're going to do the whole issue on Michael Jackson. So it depends on what media are you talking about. I'm sorry, I'm a long-time trained journalist, worked right there in Washington, D.C. at the White House and Capitol Hill. And when the evening newscast is 99% Michael Jackson. Now, I have trouble with that. Their reason for being is to tell me what's happening in the world, all over the world, capsulize it for me, not just give me one story. So there I have a problem.
Go ahead, Carlos.